The needle pierces your skin with a cold precision that speaks of countless repetitions, countless hunters who came before. You're lying on a gurney in what appears to be a medical clinic, though the shadows dancing across the Victorian wallpaper suggest something far older, far stranger than any hospital you've known. A figure in a wheelchair. No, not quite a figure, more like the suggestion of one, as if reality itself hasn't quite decided whether this person exists, leans over you. Their voice carries the weight of ages, speaking of Paleblood, speaking of contracts written in fluids far more binding than ink. The transfusion begins, and with it, your descent into a truth that most would call madness, that everything you're about to experience, every beast you'll face, every cosmic horror you'll witness, might already be nothing more than a dream, within a dream, within a dream. Welcome, dear hunters, to another journey into the deepest mysteries of gaming with King 7 lore. Tonight, we're venturing into the blood-soaked streets of Yharnam to explore one of the most profound and unsettling theories in all of Bloodborne, that the hunt never ends because, in the truest sense, it never actually began. Not in any reality we would recognize, anyway. Consider what happens in those first moments. You've come to Yharnam seeking something called Paleblood, though you don't remember why. The Blood Minister, if that's what we can call this ethereal figure, speaks to you as if through gauze, their words distorted like an echo bouncing off the walls of consciousness itself. Then comes the vision, a great wolf-like beast emerging from a pool of blood, reaching for you with claws that seem to tear through the very fabric of what you thought was real. You black out. You wake in Iosefka's clinic with nothing but a note telling you to seek Paleblood to transcend the hunt. But here's what the game doesn't tell you directly, what it leaves for you to piece together through item descriptions, environmental storytelling, and the fevered ramblings of those trapped in this endless night. You might have already entered the dream before that needle ever touched your skin. The evidence builds slowly, like blood pooling beneath a wounded beast. Every time you die, you don't simply respawn. You awaken. The hunter's mark, that twisted symbol that serves as your escape from danger, carries a description that should chill you to your core. It allows you to awaken afresh, as if it were all just a bad dream. Not metaphorically, not poetically. The game is telling you, in the clearest language it knows how to use, that death in Yharnam is awakening from one layer of dream into another. But to understand the true nature of this nightmare, we need to examine the architecture of Bloodborne's reality. Or perhaps we should say realities, plural, because what Miyazaki and his team have created here isn't a simple binary between sleeping and waking. It's a complex lattice of interconnected dream states, each one bleeding into the others like watercolors on wet paper. The hunter's dream stands as our most obvious example, our sanctuary between deaths, between moments of horror. Gehrman sits in his wheelchair among the flowers, bound to this place by forces that transcend simple contracts or curses. The plain doll moves with an almost life that shouldn't exist, speaking words that suggest she knows far more about your nature as a dreamer than she initially lets on. This place, we learn through various lore fragments, is an otherworldly replica of the original Hunter's Workshop, created through a pact between Gehrman and the Moon Presence, that pale skeletal god that watches over all hunters from its perch beyond the visible stars. If you're enjoying this descent into Bloodborne's layered mystery so far, I genuinely appreciate if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this video reach fellow hunters and lore enthusiasts through YouTube's algorithm. Your support keeps these deep investigations into gaming's most enigmatic worlds coming, and trust me, we're just beginning to scratch the surface of this particular nightmare. The hunter's dream exists in a space between spaces. When you travel there, you're not simply fast traveling to another location in Yharnam, you're shifting between dimensional layers. The messengers, those grotesque little creatures that serve as your link between worlds, can move freely between these layers, carrying items and blood echoes from one realm to another. This isn't mere game mechanics dressed up as lore, it's fundamental to understanding what Bloodborne is telling us about the nature of its reality. Consider the influence of Lovecraft's dream cycle on Bloodborne's cosmology. In Lovecraft's stories, the Dreamlands aren't illusions or simple unconscious fantasies. They're alternate dimensions as real as our waking world, places where physical objects can be carried back and forth, where death has different meanings, where the geography follows the logic of nightmares rather than physics. Bloodborne embraces this concept completely. The items you find in the deepest nightmare realms, the weapons forged from the bones of great ones, the blood gems that pulse with otherworldly power. These can be brought back to what the game calls the waking world of Yharnam. But if items can cross between dream and reality so freely, what does that say about the distinction between the two? The answer becomes clearer when we examine the cycle of hunters that preceded you. Jura, the retired hunter who guards old Yharnam with his Gatling gun, speaks of no longer dreaming. Eileen the Crow mentions that she no longer dreams, suggesting this is why she can't return from death like you can. These aren't metaphors for losing hope or growing old. They're literal statements about their relationship to the hunter's dream. They were once like you, bound to the dream, dying and awakening over and over in an endless cycle of violence. But something severed their connection, leaving them mortal, vulnerable, real in a way that you, still caught in the dream, are not. The pillars rising from the misty void around the hunter's dream workshop tell their own story. Some players interpret these as gravestones, markers for all the hunters who came before, who served their purpose and were released or abandoned by the moon presence. Others see them as anchor points, each one representing a different hunter's dream, a different iteration of this same cyclic nightmare playing out across parallel dimensions. The game never gives us a definitive answer, but that ambiguity itself speaks to the dreamlike nature of the experience. In dreams, things can be multiple contradictory things simultaneously. A pillar can be a gravestone and a tether and a prison bar all at once. If you're finding value in unraveling these cosmic mysteries with me, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore seekers. Together, we're building something special here, a place where we can explore gaming's deepest narratives without fear of the unknown. Your support truly makes these lengthy investigations possible. But the hunter's dream is just one layer of this onion of unreality. To truly understand why everything might already be a dream, we need to talk about the moon presence and its grand design. This entity, revealed only in the game's true ending, has orchestrated the entire hunter system for purposes we can only guess at. Some scholars of Yharnam's lore suggest it feeds on the blood echoes gathered by hunters. Others propose it's using hunters as antibodies against other great ones who might threaten its dominion. But there's a third possibility, one that aligns perfectly with our dream theory. The moon presence doesn't just oversee the hunt, it dreams the hunt into existence. Think about Gehrman's role in this cosmic arrangement. He's described as the first hunter, but first of what exactly? Not the first to hunt beasts. Beast hunting existed before the hunter's dream. No, Gehrman was the first to enter into this specific contract, to become the host of the hunter's dream, to serve as the moon presence's surrogate in maintaining this pocket dimension where hunters are reborn, refined, and eventually either freed or consumed. His workshop in the dream is a perfect replica of his real workshop, yet it exists outside time, outside space, in a realm where the moon presence's will shapes reality itself. The moon presence needs surrogates because, like most great ones, it exists in dimensions that don't quite align with human perception. It can no more directly interact with the human world than we could have a conversation with a two-dimensional drawing. So it creates these buffer zones, these dream layers, where its will can be interpreted through human consciousness. Gehrman shapes the hunter's dream according to his memories and desires. Hence the doll, who may or may not be based on a real person named Maria, and the peaceful garden that contrasts so sharply with Yharnam's blood-soaked streets. Every hunter who enters the dream becomes part of this system, a cog in a machine whose purpose transcends individual understanding. You gather blood echoes, the literal life force of everything you kill, and these echoes don't disappear when you die. They persist, waiting to be reclaimed, because in the logic of dreams, energy is never truly destroyed, only transformed and recycled. The moon presence feeds on this energy, grows stronger from it, uses it to maintain the barriers between dimensions, between dream and nightmare, between the cosmos where great ones dwell and the fragile reality humans call home. But perhaps the most damning evidence for the dream theory comes from an unexpected source, Micolash, host of the nightmare. This madman, who we find in the Nightmare of Mensis, conducting an endless ritual in pursuit of cosmic knowledge, speaks the most telling words in the entire game as he dies. Now I'm waking up, I'll forget everything. Let those words sink in for a moment. Micolash, who has spent who knows how long in the Nightmare of Mensis communing with great ones, who has achieved the cosmic insight that Byrgenwerth scholars died trying to obtain, knows that death means waking up. And more crucially, he knows that waking up means forgetting. This isn't the rambling of a madman, or rather, it is, but it's the kind of madness that comes from seeing too much truth, not too little. The school of Mensis. We learned through various lore fragments and environmental storytelling, performed a ritual that pulled their consciousness into the nightmare realm while leaving their physical bodies behind in Yharnam. Walk through that cursed village and you'll find them. Dozens of mummified corpses still sitting in their chairs, still wearing their cage-like helmets, still locked in whatever trance allowed them to project their minds into dimensions beyond human comprehension. They're not dead, not exactly. They're dreaming so deeply that their bodies have withered away to nothing while their minds explore realities we can barely imagine. The Mensis cage itself deserves examination. This strange headpiece, which increases your frenzy madness when worn, is described as an antenna that allows one to commune with great ones. But antennae don't generate signals, they receive them. The cage doesn't let you speak to great ones so much as it lets them speak through you, using your consciousness as a receiver for thoughts and concepts that human minds were never meant to process. Is it any wonder that wearing it drives you mad? You're literally opening your mind to transmissions from beings whose very existence defies human understanding. This brings us to Ram, the vacuous spider, and the veil she maintains over reality. When you first explore Yharnam, the moon appears normal, if perpetually full. The citizens, while hostile and showing signs of the beast plague, still appear mostly human. But kill Ram, and the veil drops. The moon turns blood red and hangs impossibly low in the sky, pregnant with malevolence. The citizens reveal their true forms. Twisted, elongated monstrosities that were always there, just hidden from your perception. Amygdalas, those spider-like great ones, become visible clinging to buildings throughout the city, though they were always there, watching, waiting. Ram's title, vacuous, meaning empty or mindless, is deeply ironic. She's not maintaining this veil through ignorance, but through a deliberate emptying of self, a willing blindness that extends to all of Yharnam. She's protecting humanity from a truth that would destroy it, that the city exists in a space between dream and nightmare, that the great ones have always been there, that what humans call reality is just another layer of cosmic dreaming. When Willem, the head of Byrgenwerth College, points to the lake where Ram resides, he's not just directing you to a boss fight, he's pointing to the last barrier between ignorance and awful enlightenment. The blood moon that appears after Ram's death isn't arriving, it's being revealed. It was always there, hidden behind the veil, waiting. Under its light, the boundary between dream and reality doesn't just blur, it dissolves entirely. Creatures from nightmare realms can now step freely into Yharnam. The one reborn, that massive amalgamation of corpses and cosmic horror, literally drops from the sky into Yharnam. The line between what's real and what's dreamed becomes meaningless, because at this level of reality, there is no distinction. Everything is simultaneously real and unreal, present and absent, sleeping and awake. This revelation forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about Yharnam itself. The city's architecture defies logic when you really examine it. Streets loop back on themselves impossibly. Buildings connect in ways that violate three-dimensional space. The geography shifts when you're not looking, with new paths opening and old ones closing based on triggers that feel more psychological than physical. Central Yharnam transforms from a beast hunting ground to a burning wasteland, not through any visible catastrophe, but through a shift in perception, in dream state, in which layer of nightmare you're experiencing. Consider the 3 endings of Bloodborne, each one offering a different interpretation of what it means to wake from this dream. In the Yharnam sunrise ending, Gehrman beheads you in the hunter's dream, and you wake in the real Yharnam as the sun rises for the first time in who knows how long. The implication seems clear. Death in the dream means awakening to reality. You're freed from the cycle, allowed to return to a normal life. But is it really that simple? The game describes this ending with the phrase, "You lived through the night to see another day." But what if that new day is just another dream, another layer of the onion, another iteration of the cycle? The second ending, honoring wishes, sees you refuse Gehrman's mercy and fight him to the death. You win, but victory is Pyrrhic. The moon presence descends, binds you to the hunter's dream, and you take Gehrman's place as the host of this dimension, doomed to guide future hunters through their own nightmares for eternity. You become the dreamer who maintains the dream, the host whose consciousness shapes this pocket of unreality. The doll pushes your wheelchair through the garden that will be your prison until another hunter strong enough to defeat you comes along. If one ever does. But it's the third ending, childhood's beginning, that most supports our dream theory. By consuming 3 third umbilical cords items literally described as connections to the Great One's consciousness, you gain enough insight to resist the moon presence's control. You fight and defeat it, and in doing so, you transcend humanity itself, being reborn as an infant. Great One. The doll picks up your new form, small and slug-like, and speaks of hope, of potential, of new beginnings. But what you've really done is transcended the dream-reality dichotomy entirely. You've become a being that exists across multiple dimensions simultaneously, for whom the distinction between sleeping and waking is meaningless. There's a telling detail that persists across all endings and even into New Game Plus cycles, the gravestone in the hunter's dream. This monument, which allows you to travel to the hunter's nightmare, the dimension where blood-drunk hunters are trapped in eternal combat, remains even after you've supposedly woken up, in the Yharnam sunrise ending. If you start a New Game Plus, beginning the cycle again, the grave is still there, still active, suggesting that your awakening was just another layer of sleep, another turn of the wheel, another dream within the endless dream. This cyclical nature extends to the entire structure of Yharnam's curse. The fishing hamlet, which we visit in the hunter's nightmare, is where it all began. Bergenworth scholars, led by Willem and including Gehrman and Maria, discovered this village, where humans had made contact with Kos, a great one, from the ocean's depths. They violated the village, experimented on its inhabitants, and when Kos washed up dead on the beach, possibly killed by their actions, they desecrated her corpse and that of her orphan child. The villagers cursed the scholars and all hunters who would come after to be trapped in an endless hunt, an endless nightmare, a dream from which there is no true waking. The Orphan of Kos, which you fight on that cursed beach, isn't just a boss, it's the crystallization of that curse. Its screams echo across dimensions, through time, creating and maintaining the hunter's nightmare, where blood-drunk hunters are trapped forever. When you defeat it and find its black phantom in the real fishing hamlet, you have the option to attack it, and doing so provides the message, "Nightmare slain." You haven't just killed a creature, you've ended a dream that has been repeating, cycling, feeding on itself for who knows how long. But here's the crucial question. If defeating the orphan ends one nightmare, what about all the others? The hunter's dream continues. The nightmare of Mensis persists even after Micolash's death. The nightmare frontier where amygdala reigns remains accessible. These aren't separate, disconnected spaces. They're all facets of the same vast dreaming consciousness that encompasses everything you've experienced from the moment you accepted that blood transfusion. The NPCs you encounter throughout your journey offer further evidence of the dream's all-encompassing nature. Gilbert, the sick man who gives you the flamethrower, speaks of coming to Yharnam for blood healing but finding only disappointment and disease. But his window is boarded up. You never see him directly. By the time you return later, he's transformed into a beast. But was he ever human to begin with? Or just another projection of the dream, playing out his role in your narrative? Ariana, the woman of the night who offers you her blood, seems more real, more grounded. You can save her, bring her to safety, watch her story unfold. But that story ends with her giving birth to a celestial child, a Great One larva that she both loves and fears. How did a human woman become pregnant with a cosmic entity? The game hints that Edon, the formless Great One, is the father. But Edon exists only as sound, as concept, as idea. The pregnancy makes sense only in dream logic, where metaphor can become literal, where thought can impregnate matter. The chapel dweller, perhaps the only truly benevolent character you meet, wants nothing more than to help people, to provide sanctuary in a world gone mad. But look closer at his form. His skin is gray, his body hunched and distorted. He's more beast than man already, yet his mind remains kind, generous, human. He represents what might be the cruelest aspect of the dream, the illusion of choice, of agency, of the ability to do good in a world designed for horror. Every person you send to his chapel meets a terrible fate, no matter your intentions. The dream doesn't allow for happy endings, only different flavors of nightmare. Even your own character's motivations come into question under dream analysis. You came to Yharnam seeking Paleblood, but what is Paleblood? The game never gives a straight answer. Some item descriptions suggest it's another name for the moon presence. Others imply it's the sky itself after Ram's veil falls. The note in the clinic tells you to seek Paleblood to transcend the hunt, but transcend to what? The game's opening asks you to sign a contract, but you never see what you're agreeing to. In dreams, we often find ourselves in situations with no clear beginning, pursuing goals we don't fully understand, following logic that makes sense only within the dream's context. The blood ministration itself, the process by which Yharnam's citizens gain their healing and their power, is described in terms that evoke both medical procedure and religious ritual. But blood in Bloodborne isn't just a bodily fluid, it's a medium for consciousness, for memory, for will. When you consume blood vials to heal, you're not just restoring health points, you're ingesting the life force, the dreams, the memories of whatever that blood came from. The blood of great ones, we're told, has special properties, allowing humans to transcend their limitations. But transcend to what? To become dreamers themselves, shapers of reality, prisoners in gilded cages of their own making. The Healing Church, Yharnam's dominant religious institution, built its entire theology around blood ministration. But look at what that theology led to: mass transformation, cosmic madness, the breakdown of the barrier between human and beast, between real and unreal. The church's highest members, Lawrence, Ludwig, Amelia, all became beasts themselves, consumed by the very power they sought to control. But were they ever anything other than beasts? In a dream, past and present and future can exist simultaneously. Lawrence is both the founder of the Healing Church and the cleric beast. You fight on the bridge and the burning creature in the hunter's nightmare. All three states exist at once, layered on top of each other like transparent sheets. Ludwig's transformation is particularly telling. Once the church's greatest hunter, he wielded the holy moonlight sword, a weapon of profound beauty and power. But in the hunter's nightmare, we find him transformed into a hideous horse-like creature, mindlessly violent until, mid-battle, he notices his old sword and remembers who he was. For a moment, he regains his humanity, his nobility, fighting you as Ludwig the Holy Blade rather than Ludwig the Accursed. But this isn't character development, it's dream logic, where identity is fluid, where you can be multiple contradictory things depending on what the dreamer, you, the moon presence, something else entirely, needs you to be in that moment. Here, Patients who were experimented on by the healing church wander in various states of transformation. Some have enlarged heads filled with cosmic knowledge. Others have become living failures, unable to complete their metamorphosis into something greater. But listen to their dialogue. They speak of wanting to be like Lady Maria, of wanting to ascend, of wanting to become something more. They're not being tortured. They volunteered for this, sought it out, believed it would grant them transcendence. In the dream, desire becomes. Reality becomes nightmare, becomes desire again, an endless cycle of transformation without resolution. Lady Maria herself, found at the top of the astral clock tower, represents another layer of dream logic. She's Gehrman's apprentice, possibly the inspiration for the plain doll, a hunter who became so disgusted with her own actions that she threw her weapon into a well and committed suicide. Yet here she is in the hunter's nightmare, guarding the secret of the fishing hamlet, fighting with the same blood-inge technique she supposedly renounced. She's simultaneously dead and alive, repentant and violent, guardian and prisoner. When she stabs herself during her fight, igniting her blood with eldritch fire, she's not just using a combat technique, she's reenacting her own death, her own guilt, trapped in a performance that has repeated countless times before and will repeat countless times again. The fishing hamlet itself exists in a temporal paradox that only makes sense within dream logic. It's ancient history, the original sin that created the hunter's nightmare. But you visit it in present tense, with the villagers still alive, if transformed, still cursing you for crimes that haven't happened yet, or happened long ago, or are happening right now. Time in the hamlet moves like thick oil, with past and present and future mixing together. The orphan of Kos emerges from its dead mother's womb fully grown, fighting with a placenta still attached, simultaneously newborn and ancient, beginning and ending, the first hunter and the last. When you finally confront the orphan and hear its cries, those horrible, almost human screams that sound like a child calling for its mother, you're not just fighting a boss. You're confronting the source of the dream itself, the original trauma that created the endless cycle of hunting and dying and awakening. The orphan's defeat doesn't end the dream. Nothing can end, something that never truly began. But it does reveal its nature. The shadow you find afterward, the one you can choose to comfort or attack, represents the choice every dreamer faces. Accept the dream or fight against it, but know that both choices are themselves part of the dream. This brings us back to the central paradox. If everything is already a dream, then when did the dream begin? The answer Bloodborne provides is both simple and incomprehensible. It didn't begin. It always was. The hunt is eternal, not because it lasts forever going forward, but because it extends infinitely in both directions through time. Every hunter who has ever existed or will exist is hunting right now, in this moment, in parallel dimensions layered on top of each other like sheets of paper. The graves in the hunter's dream support this interpretation. They don't just transport you to different locations, they transport you to different states of the dream. The Yharnam you visit at the beginning of your hunt, and the Yharnam you visit after killing Rom aren't the same place at different times. They're different layers of the same eternal moment, different frequencies of the same cosmic nightmare. When you use a grave to travel, you're not moving through space, but through states of consciousness, through layers of dream, through variations on a theme that plays out endlessly across infinite dimensions. The messengers, those small, grotesque creatures that seem to worship hunters, exist simultaneously in all layers of the dream. They can appear in the hunter's dream, in Yharnam, in the various nightmare realms, always offering gifts, always providing guidance, always serving their incomprehensible purpose. Some lore theorists suggest they are the transformed remains of children who died in earlier iterations of the hunt. Others propose they're manifestations of the dream itself, its way of communicating with those trapped within it. But perhaps they're both, and neither, and something else entirely. Dream logic doesn't require single explanations or consistent causality. The One Reborn, that massive creature you fight in Yharnam, literally falls from the sky when you approach its arena. It doesn't emerge from a portal or climb up from below. It drops from above, from outside the boundaries of what should be possible in a physical world. Its name tells us everything. It's been reborn. But reborn from what? The Bell Maidens who summon it perform their ritual, regardless of whether you've killed it before. Because in the dream, death is just another state of being, and being reborn is as simple as remembering you were alive. The wet nurse, guardian of the infant Murgo whose crying fills the nightmare of Mensis, presents another paradox. You never see Murgo directly, only the wet nurse, a being of shadows and blades that protects an invisible child. When you defeat the wet nurse, Murgo's crying stops, and you receive the message, "Nightmare slain." But you haven't killed a baby, you've ended a concept, silenced an idea, stopped a dream from crying out across dimensions. Murgo might never have existed as a physical being, only as a possibility, a potential, a dream of what could have been if Queen Yharnam's child had lived. Queen Yharnam herself appears throughout your journey, but not as a living being. She's a projection, a memory, a ghost that exists simultaneously in multiple locations. You see her in white, weeping, reaching out to you before vanishing. She's in the past ancient queen of the Pthumerians, the present appearing before you in Yharnam, and the future waiting at the end of the Chalice dungeons. Time means nothing to her, because she exists outside it, in the space between dream and memory where all moments happen at once. The Chalice dungeons themselves deserve special attention in our analysis. These aren't just optional areas, they're archaeological digs into the subconscious of the dream itself. Each chalice creates a temporary pocket dimension, a ritualistic space where you can explore the buried memories of ancient civilizations. But these civilizations, the Pthumerians, the Loran, aren't just extinct peoples from Yharnam's past. They're previous iterations of the same cycle, earlier dreams that played out the same themes of ascension, transformation, communion with great ones, and inevitable collapse into beasthood and madness. When you fight the Pthumerian descendant or the Elder, you're not battling ancient warriors who've somehow survived millennia. You're confronting the archetypal forms that repeat across every iteration of the dream. The proud warrior, the wise elder, the fallen queen, the abhorrent beast. These figures exist not as individuals, but as roles that must be filled, parts that must be played for the dream to maintain its narrative coherence. The bloodletting beast found in the deepest Chalice dungeons has a particularly revealing detail. When you fight it in its headless form and damage it enough, a parasite emerges from its neck. A parasite that's been identified as potentially being the true form of Odon, the formless Great One. But how can a formless being have a true form? How can a concept become a parasite? Only in dream logic, where metaphor and reality collapse into each other, where the formless can take form just long enough to be glimpsed before dissolving back into possibility. This philosophical complexity extends to the very mechanics of the game. Insight, the cosmic currency that lets you perceive hidden truths, doesn't just reveal things that were always there. It might actually change reality based on your perception. At zero insight, certain enemies don't exist. At high insight, new attacks become possible, new dangers emerge. The game isn't just showing you more of what was hidden, it's creating new layers of nightmare based on your ability to perceive them. You're not discovering the dream, you're dreaming it into existence through the act of observation. Blood echoes, the currency you collect from defeated enemies, aren't just gameplay abstraction. They're described as the will of those you've killed, their life force, their dreams and memories condensed into collectible form. When you use these echoes to level up, you're not just getting stronger. You're absorbing the dreams of others, incorporating their nightmares into your own consciousness, becoming more deeply embedded in the dream with every echo consumed. The stronger you become, the more bound to the dream you are, the less able to distinguish between what's real and what's nightmare. The game's invasion mechanics, where other players can enter your world as adversaries, takes on new meaning in this context. These aren't just other players, they're other dreamers, other iterations of hunters trapped in parallel versions of the same nightmare. When you fight them, you're battling across dimensional boundaries, your dreams colliding and overlapping in spaces where the walls between realities grow thin. The Bell Maidens who summon these invaders aren't creating portals. They're ringing frequencies that cause different dream layers to resonate and temporarily merge. Even the game's audio design supports the dream interpretation. The music doesn't just accompany the action, it seems to emerge from the environment itself, growing louder and more intense as situations become more dreamlike. The sound of crying babies permeates certain areas, but you never find the source. Whispers in languages that don't quite sound human echo through empty halls. The Great One's presence is felt more through sound than sight. Mergo's crying, Aedon's formless voice, the wet nurse's lullaby. In dreams, sound often carries more emotional weight than visuals, and Bloodborne uses this to create an audioscape that feels simultaneously real and unreal. The transformation from human to beast, the central body horror of Bloodborne, follows dream logic rather than biological logic. It happens too quickly, too completely, triggered by emotional states rather than physical causes. Fear, anger, bloodlust. These psychological states cause immediate physical transformation. Citizens become beasts, not through infection or gradual change, but through a sudden shift in consciousness, a tipping point where their humanity dissolves into nightmare. The beast plague isn't a disease. It's a collective nightmare made manifest, fear taking physical form, the id overcoming the ego in a way that only makes sense within dream psychology. Father Gascoigne's transformation during your fight exemplifies this perfectly. He begins as a hunter, controlled, skilled, human. But as the battle progresses, as his bloodlust rises, he transforms into a beast mid-combat. There's no extended transformation sequence, no gradual change. One moment he's human, the next he's monster. His daughter's music box can temporarily restore his humanity, but only briefly, because in the dream, identity is fluid, constantly shifting based on emotional state and narrative need. The blood-starved beast in old Yharnam presents another paradox. It's been crucified, hung up like a warning or a sacrifice, but it breaks free when you approach. Was it always going to break free? Was it waiting specifically for you? In dream logic, both are true. The beast exists in a state of perpetual crucifixion and perpetual freedom, dying and living, warning and threat, all simultaneously until the act of observation collapses these possibilities into a single narrative moment. Dark Beast Pal, the electrical skeletal beast you find in Hypogean Gaul, exists in a state that shouldn't be possible. A skeleton held together and animated purely by electrical current. When you damage it enough, it collapses into a pile of bones, only to reassemble moments later. It's simultaneously dead and alive, matter and energy, real and impossible. The game doesn't try to explain how this works because it doesn't need to. In dreams, things don't need scientific explanation. They exist because the dream requires them to exist. The nightmare frontier, with its poisonous pools and winter lanterns, presents a landscape that follows emotional rather than physical geography. The poison doesn't work like real toxin. It builds up based on how long you're in contact with it, then suddenly triggers all at once, like a nightmare suddenly becoming too intense to bear. The winter lanterns, those brain-headed creatures that cause frenzy just by looking at you, represent the danger of too much insight, too much awareness of the dream's nature. They sing with female voices, lullabies that sound almost familiar, as if you've heard them before in some half-remembered dream. Amygdala, the Great One you fight in the frontier, has been watching you the entire game. There are dozens of amygdalas throughout Yharnam, clinging to buildings, reaching through portals, always present but invisible until you have enough insight to see them. When you fight one directly, it doesn't feel like a unique encounter. It feels like you're fighting the concept of amygdala, the archetypal form that all the others are merely projections of. When it tears off its own arms to use as weapons, it's not just a desperate move. It's the dream logic of self-destruction as empowerment, of becoming stronger through dismemberment. The brain of Mensis, that massive, malformed brain you find in the nightmare, represents perhaps the purest expression of the dream theory. It's a living brain without a body, suspended in a tower, driving anyone who looks at it to madness. But when you drop it into the pit and approach it peacefully, you can make contact with it, and it responds with what seems like gratitude. It's simultaneously hostile and lonely, dangerous and pitiful, a dreaming consciousness trapped in its own nightmare, just like you. The make contact gesture you learn from the brain isn't just a fun emote, it's a revelation about the nature of communication in the dream. The gesture involves holding your arms at specific angles that mirror the positioning of celestial bodies, suggesting that in the dream, body position and cosmic alignment are somehow connected. You're not just gesturing, you're tuning yourself like an antenna to receive transmissions from dimensions beyond human comprehension. This brings us to the game's ultimate revelation. You haven't been climbing through layers of nightmare to reach reality. You've been descending deeper into dream. Each boss defeated not bringing you closer to waking, but binding you more thoroughly to the cycle. The moon presence isn't the source of the dream. It's just another dreamer, more powerful than you, but ultimately trapped in the same cycle, feeding on blood echoes because that's all it knows how to do, maintaining the hunter's dream because that's its role in this cosmic play. When you consume those 3/3 umbilical cords and gain the insight to resist the moon presence, you're not breaking free of the dream. You're learning to dream lucidly, to shape the nightmare rather than be shaped by it. Your transformation into an infant. The plain doll's repeated phrase throughout the game takes on new meaning in this context. "Welcome home, good hunter," she says, every time you return to the dream. But what if she's not welcoming you back? What if she's welcoming you home for the first time, every time, because in the dream, every moment is both the first and the last, the beginning and the end, the waking and the sleeping? Her other recurring statement, "May you find your worth in the waking world," sounds like encouragement, but consider the implication. She's not saying you will find worth in the waking world, only that you may. It's a hope, not a promise, because she knows, has always known, that there is no waking world, only different layers of the same endless dream. The worth you're seeking doesn't exist in some reality beyond the nightmare. It exists in accepting the nightmare for what it is and finding meaning within it. The game's entire narrative structure supports this reading. You begin with amnesia, remembering only that you're seeking something called Paleblood. You end by either forgetting everything, Yharnam sunrise, remembering everything forever, honoring wishes, or transcending the need for memory entirely, childhood's beginning. In all three cases, the cycle continues. The hunt never ends because it never began. It simply is, was, and always will be a dream, dreaming itself, a snake eating its own tail, a story that tells itself into existence. Even the act of playing the game becomes part of the metaphor. You, the player, enter this world voluntarily, create an avatar, and guide them through a nightmare of your own choosing. When you die, you respawn. Try again, learn from your mistakes, grow stronger. You're not just playing a game about dreams, you're participating in the dream, becoming a dreamer yourself, adding your consciousness to the collective nightmare that is Bloodborne. Every time you start a new game plus, you're not replaying the story, you're experiencing another iteration of the eternal cycle. The enemies are stronger because the dream is deeper. Your memories, items, and levels carry over because, in dreams, we sometimes remember other dreams. The world resets but also doesn't, existing in a state of perpetual present tense where everything has happened, is happening, and will happen again. The profound horror of Bloodborne isn't in its monsters or its gore, it's in this revelation that there is no escape because there's nothing to escape from. You can't wake up from a dream when waking up is itself part of the dream. You can't end a hunt that exists outside of linear time. You can't find meaning in a reality that doesn't distinguish between real and unreal, between sleeping and waking, between life and death. Yet perhaps that's also the strange comfort Bloodborne offers. If everything is already a dream, then nothing you do can make things worse. Every death is temporary, every victory hollow, every choice ultimately meaningless in the cosmic scale. But within that meaninglessness, you create your own meaning. You choose to help the chapel dweller, not because it will change anything, but because in that moment, in that layer of dream, kindness matters. You fight the orphan not to end its suffering, but to acknowledge it, to witness the original trauma that birthed this entire nightmare cycle. In defeating it, you're not solving anything. You're simply playing your role in a drama that has repeated countless times before and will repeat countless times again. This interpretation transforms Bloodborne from a story about overcoming cosmic horror into something far more unsettling, a meditation on the nature of reality itself, on the impossibility of knowing whether we're ever truly awake or simply dreaming that we are. The game asks us to consider whether the distinction between real and unreal matters if we can never definitively determine which state we're in. The community of players and lore scholars who've spent years analyzing Bloodborne have developed countless theories about its true nature, but perhaps the most compelling aspect of the dream interpretation is how it accommodates all of them. Is Bloodborne a sequel to Demon's Souls? In dream logic, it can be. Is it connected to the Dark Souls universe? In the space between dimensions where great ones dwell, all realities can touch. Is it a metaphor for the creative process, for mental illness, for cosmic insignificance? Yes, yes, and yes, dreams don't require single interpretations. The Paleblood Hunt, the most comprehensive analysis of Bloodborne's lore ever written, spans over 100 pages and still can't definitively answer what Paleblood is. But that's precisely the point. In dreams, symbols shift, meaning based on context, based on the dreamer's needs, based on layers of association that don't follow logical rules. Paleblood is the moon presence, and the sky after Rom dies, and the player character themselves, and none of these things, and all of them simultaneously. The game's developers at From Software, led by Hidetaka Miyazaki, have deliberately maintained this ambiguity. When asked about Bloodborne's story, Miyazaki has stated that he wants players to create their own interpretations, to find their own meaning in the nightmare. This isn't creative laziness. It's an understanding that dreams, real dreams, don't have authoritative interpretations. They mean what the dreamer needs them to mean, fear what the dreamer fears, reveal what the dreamer is ready to see. This approach has created one of the most engaged and thoughtful communities in gaming. Players don't just share strategies or character builds. They share philosophical treatises, psychological analyses, literary comparisons. The dream theory has inspired countless videos, essays, and discussions that go far beyond typical gaming discourse. Bloodborne has become a shared nightmare that we're all trying to interpret together, each player's understanding adding another layer to the collective dream. The game's influence extends beyond its own boundaries. The concept of reality as layered dreams has influenced other games, other stories, other artistic expressions. But more than that, it's changed how many players think about the nature of gaming itself. When we play Bloodborne, we're not just controlling a character, we're participating in a ritual, entering a constructed dream space where the normal rules don't apply, where death is temporary, but trauma is eternal, where victory and defeat are just different ways of describing the same cyclical experience. Consider what this means for you, the player, sitting in your room, holding a controller, staring at a screen. You've entered the dream voluntarily, paid money for the privilege of experiencing this nightmare. You've died dozens, maybe hundreds of times, felt frustration and triumph, fear and exhilaration. These emotions are real, even if the world that triggered them is not. Or perhaps it's more accurate to say that the world of Bloodborne is as real as any dream, which is to say, completely real while you're experiencing it and completely unreal the moment you wake up. But do you ever really wake up? When you turn off the game, the experience stays with you. You think about that boss you can't beat, that area you haven't explored, that piece of lore you don't understand. The dream continues in your mind even when the console is off. You read wikis, watch videos, discuss theories with other players. The nightmare spreads, viral, infectious, transmitted through conversation and contemplation rather than blood. This is the ultimate horror and beauty of Bloodborne's dream theory. It suggests that all of our realities might be similarly constructed, similarly fragile, similarly dependent on consensus and perception rather than objective truth. If Yharnam can seem completely real while being entirely dream, what does that say about the world you inhabit when you're not playing? How can you be certain you're not dreaming right now, watching this video, listening to these words, thinking these thoughts? The answer, Bloodborne suggests, is that you can't be certain. And more importantly, it doesn't matter. Whether you're dreaming or awake, whether Yharnam is real or imagined, whether the hunt began in the past or exists in eternal present. These distinctions only matter if you believe there's some more real reality waiting beyond the dream. But what if there isn't? What if it's dreams all the way down, each one containing others, each one equally valid, equally meaningless, equally profound? In this reading, the true curse of the hunters isn't that they're trapped in a nightmare. It's that they believe there's something else, something better, something more real waiting for them if they can just hunt enough beasts, gain enough insight, defeat enough great ones. But every victory just reveals another layer of dream, another boss, another mystery, another cycle to complete. The hunt never ends because ending isn't a concept that applies to dreams. There's only transformation, repetition, and the eternal present moment of experience. As we reach the end of this exploration, though in truth, explorations of Bloodborne never really end, they just pause. We're left with more questions than answers. But perhaps that's the most honest response to a game that deals so deeply with the unknowable. We've traced the evidence that everything in Bloodborne might already be a dream, from the opening blood transfusion to the final transformation. We've seen how NPCs acknowledge the dream state, how the geography defies physical logic, how death and rebirth follow dream rules rather than biological ones. We've examined the layers of nightmare, the paradox of time, the impossibility of true awakening. But more than just analyzing a game, we've participated in a collective meditation on the nature of reality, consciousness, and meaning. Bloodborne doesn't just tell us a story. It invites us into an experience that questions the very nature of storytelling, of gaming, of the boundary between player and character, between dream and reality. The hunt never ends because it never began. Not in any moment we can point to, not in any reality we can verify. It simply is, eternal and immediate, a nightmare we've all agreed to share, a dream we've all chosen to dream together. And in that choice, in that shared experience of cosmic horror and existential uncertainty, we find something that might not be meaning, but feels close enough. The knowledge that we're not alone in our confusion, not isolated in our fear, not singular in our search for answers that may not exist. Thank you, fellow hunters, for joining me in this deep dive into one of gaming's most profound mysteries. If this exploration of Bloodborne's layered realities has given you new perspectives on the nightmare, or if you found yourself questioning the nature of your own reality, well, that's exactly what From Software intended. This channel exists because of viewers like you who hunger for these deeper examinations, who aren't satisfied with surface-level analysis, who want to dig into the marrow of gaming's most complex narratives. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to Keen 7 Lore. We're building a community of seekers here, people who understand that the best games aren't just entertainment, they're philosophy, psychology, and art wrapped in interactive experiences. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into gaming's hidden depths. Share this video with other hunters, other dreamers, other seekers of forbidden knowledge. Leave a comment with your own interpretation of Bloodborne's dream logic. Every perspective adds another layer to our collective understanding. And remember, whether you're in the waking world or still dreaming, whether the hunt has ended or never began, you're always welcome here at Keen 7 Lore, where we embrace the mystery, celebrate the complexity, and never stop seeking insight, even when that insight threatens to drive us mad. Until next time, may you find your worth in whatever world you inhabit, and may the good blood guide your way through dreams both beautiful and terrible. The night is long, but together we persist. Together we dream. Together we hunt.